Joining us now on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline is friend of the program, Super Bowl champion coach, BYU Football alumnus, and NFL Network contributor Brian Billick. Coach, welcome back to the show.
How are we doing today?
Great, because BYU got a win, and we are
BYU
ecstatic won to discuss a win with you. How does this change a team the next week after that lengthy 7-game losing streak?
Well, everything's a little bit better this week. You know, your meals taste a little bit better. The sun's a little bit brighter. I mean, it shouldn't be that way, but it is amazing. I know it's just one win, and it's very easy to dismiss it, but you can't, particularly when you're having the season that BYU is having. The entire building just feels better.
So it doesn't. So you're saying even though it was San Jose State and it was a 1-7 team and BYU was 1-7, take for what it was and move on at this point.
Absolutely. Even if you're a team that's 7-0, if you take wins lightly, if you dismiss them, maybe if you're one of those teams and you're playing a team that has been struggling, and it's easy to dismiss that as a win. But boy, you do that, you only play so many of these games. And so when you're a team that's going through what BYU is going through right now, you certainly aren't going to diminish a win. I don't care who it's against. You don't have the right to not feel good about a win when you're having that kind of a season.
Fresno State is up next for BYU at 5-3. They have 2 shutouts and a game that ended within 3 points. Just 3 points allowed, rather. Top 20 defense in points and yards, but then they go and lose to UNLV, which is a huge head-scratcher. What do you think of BYU's matchup with Fresno State?
Well, it's like in the NFL right now. You from week to week, you really don't know. I don't know that anybody is dominant enough to just assume that or be surprised anytime that you struggle. Fresno State, it's a storied program. It's a strong program. That's a tough place to play, too. The crowd is into it. This is going to be a tough battle for BYU. Coming off a win, obviously they can feel better about themselves. But facing that kind of defense, clearly offensively, it's nice to have gotten what they did against San Jose State. But they certainly can't fall back into that, not converting on third down, not generating big plays, and think they're going to come away with a win against the Bulldogs.
BYU's a 15-point dog. Did lines ever motivate your team in any way, or was that completely ignored?
Well, you ignore it when you're the favorite, but when you're the underdog, because, these people are putting their money where their mouth is. So you kind of go, well, what do they know that I don't know? Why is it at 15 points? Because at the end of the day, it's amazing. I would tell you that when I was coaching in the NFL, there were a lot of times I would go to the gambling sites to look at their stats. Simply because they were more reliable, and you knew that it was, that Aaron Rodgers is this percentage throwing to the left past 15 yards compared to the right on grass versus turf. I mean, those things are real, and the analytics are what they are. Now, you can only go so far. We learned that in the game last night for the baseball, because the analytics always go where they keep talking about that the managers for Houston kind of ignored some of the analytics in the World Series and said, you know what, I'm going to go with what I see more than what my analytics say right now. So sometimes you got to put you take that with a grain of salt.
It's their job to know, so I don't fault you for going to those websites, Coach, because those guys know some stuff. Let's continue with the BYU in the NFL theme now. If you were redrafting any BYU guy that is currently on an NFL roster right now, who would you take with your first pick?
Interesting. And for a team and a school that has the history offensively that BYU does, all their top players in the NFL right now are on the defensive side. When you talk about Van Noy and Ziggy Ansah and Sorensen, it's kind of interesting that it would go that way. Right now, Ziggy Ansah is probably playing as well as anybody in the league. Van Noy, I think he's leading the Patriots in tackles. But Ziggy Ansah and that presence on the outside, the maturity that he's had, he's probably having as good a season as anybody from the Y this year. And even though Detroit has struggled a little bit, he's been a real bright spot for them on the defensive side.
Who's the best team in the NFL right now? Because it's starting to get interesting, approaching the midway point of the regular season.
Yeah, I think we talked about it last time. You get into the first quarter of the season, you're kind of seeing who you are and what's going on. It's like the first quarter of a game. In the second quarter of the game, like the second quarter of the season, okay, you are who you are. We kind of know what their blitz packages are and what are your personnel and formation packages and how do you go about things. So now we're getting into, okay, like my mentor Denny Green said, you are what your record says you are, and you are who you are. So now it's what are our strengths? What can we push for our strengths? How can we offset the negatives or the places where we're not as strong? And right now, everybody has some weaknesses. We've seen that. Where it started out, Kansas City looked like they were unbeatable. They're back on a winning stint, but they had a little bit of a tough go right there. I think Philadelphia right now is probably as good as any team in the league. Carson Wentz is playing out of his head. He's on pace for 38 touchdowns, single-digit interceptions. They're running the ball very solid. Just picked up Jay Ajayi from Miami. And then you look at defensively, and they kind of get forgotten about defensively because of all the things Carson Wentz is doing. But defensively, they're pretty darn good. They're very high on third down conversions and very good in the red zone. They put pressure on you. So they're probably as complete a team as we see right now. Pittsburgh, you always want to go with, but they'll go schizophrenic on you at some point. And you talk about scratching your head after a loss. They could up and lose to someone. You go, how does that happen? But right now, if they can stay on track with all the weapons offensively, that defense, particularly with T.J. Watt and Bud Dupree coming off the edges, they're about as complete a team as well, particularly in the AFC as we've seen.
Hey, fly, Eagles, fly for now. And let's talk about BYU players right now that are hoping to get into the NFL, led by Fred Warner. What kind of NFL draft stock and potential does Fred have?
Well, I checked with a couple personnel people around the league. I knew we were going to talk about this week to see where he is rated. And it changes between now and obviously between the combine and all the personal workouts. It can change dramatically. Right now, most people have him as a mid-round pick, which means you're talking late 3, maybe into the 4th round. Obviously, when you look at the success of some of the people we talked about, Ziggy Ansah, Nanoy, Sorensen, there's a good pedigree there. I think this is a good balanced player, I think is the way he's viewed at. I don't know that they're looking at any one particular thing that pushes him up to higher rounds than that, but a good, solid player that would be a good pickup in the late 3rd, maybe in the 4th round.
Brian Billick, NFL Super Bowl champion coach and NFL Network contributor with us on BYU Sports Nation. Coach, what's your next week like with responsibilities on air and whatnot?
Well, we just did our NFL playbook on Wednesdays at 6 o'clock on the NFL Network. That's 6 o'clock Eastern. Today I'll do what they call TNF First Look, getting ready for the Thursday night game. We're on from 3 to 5 on the East Coast time. We'll talk about, obviously, the matchup with the Buffalo Bills tonight with the New York Jets. Couple good games on tap. Number 1 game, obviously, is Kansas City and Dallas. Everybody wants to see how Dallas is going to do if indeed Ezekiel Elliott doesn't play. I think a big game a lot of people aren't paying attention to just because the consequences are going to be the Baltimore Ravens and the Tennessee Titans. They're both kind of look like they may end up in that AFC wild card division. If you're not going to win the division, you're competing outside of division, and the head-to-head becomes so important. So I think this could be a big, big game.
Great stuff, Coach. We look forward to it. Nobody circles the wagon, speaking of the Bills tonight. And,
like the Buffalo
Bills, and like Coach Brian Billick with us on BYU Sports Nation. Thanks for the time, as always.
You got it, guys.